Thank you. Thank you, Tamara. Yeah, and sorry we're going right ahead without a break. We wanted to get as much as we could within the day. We will be taking a half-hour break after this panel. So we're just going to forge ahead. Our next panel is focused on researching writing. I think it's a great follow-up to the work this morning. And our first speaker is Scott Crossley, a professor of special education at Vanderbilt Peabody College. Scott?
Hi, everybody. How are you doing? I can't actually share my video because it says I'm not allowed to. Nope. Guess I can now. Hey, everybody. My name is Scott Crossley. As Mark said, I am at Vanderbilt University. And I'm going to talk to you about some work that we've been doing within the context of something called AILO. And this is an NSF-funded institution, AI institution grant that focuses specifically on adult learning and online education. So we're branching out a little bit from our K through 12 approach, and now we're looking at adults. So everything that I have to talk to you about here is related or could be surfaced at the K through 12 level. So I want to talk about using AI, specifically generative AI and non-generative AI, to do personalization and intelligent textbooks, specifically using large language models. As Mark mentioned, generative AI is basically large language models. So our focus specifically is going to be on something called ITEL, which is Intelligent Textbooks for Enhanced Lifelong Learning. And it's important to note that ITEL is a framework, so it's not domain specific, and the input is a markdown file. And the goal here is basically to allow developers, whether those be teachers, administrators, or people within learning platforms, to automatically develop intelligent textbooks that integrate AI to ensure that students have more interactions within the learning domain when they're reading about specific content and context. So what you see here on the left-hand side is a very simple intelligent textbook on Python programming, something that adults might use. We're going to talk about a couple of things within AI, and all of this has to do with personalization. So basically how to use AI, large language models, to personalize the learning experience for students. We're going to also talk about how AI can look and use things like keystroke logging for detection purposes, and then also how we can use AI along with things like reading focus to provide more specific feedback to learners within these systems. So the first thing I want to talk about is the use of summaries, because much of what we do in ITEL when it comes to interaction is to get students writing, right? We want students to be producing knowledge. We want them to be reconstructing information from the text. We want to be able to make sure that they can understand what they've read. And the way that we've done that within ITEL is to develop these summarization opportunities for students at the end of subsections within ITEL. And as you can see, this is what it looks like. It's pretty simple. We ask students to write a summary that's within 5,200 word long. It's in English. It's on topic. It's not plagiarized. It doesn't have foul words in it as well. In doing so, we want to make sure that we can better understand kind of the mental model or the situational model that students have developed within reading the text. Now, we want to provide students with feedback, right? And in order to do that, we have to use these large language models. They've turned out to be the best and most efficient way to develop feedback mechanisms for students. So we've developed basically two summary scoring models, and these are built on large language models called longformers, which are pre-trained models that are available for free from Allen AI. And basically what we do is we take a large corpus of summaries, in this case over 5,000 summaries, that have been scored by human raters. And these come from about 100 different source texts. And what human raters have scored these on are basically like the main idea, How well does the summary capture that main idea? The details, how well does the summary contain the details? And then cohesion, how well does the summary transition? And then humans also develop or code these summaries based on words. So how well do they use like objective language? Do they paraphrase correctly? And what type of language are they using? And so what we want to be able to do is we want to use this AI, these large language models, to basically develop models to automatically assess how students are performing when they write summaries based on the content of their summaries and the words that they're using within those summaries. And so when we do that, you can see these are the performances for both content and wording, content on the left and wording on the right. And what you're looking for is basically a straight line between the X and Y axes. And we see that these large language models are very good at predicting success in student summary writing in terms of both content and wording. I've been working in what's called natural language processing for a long time. And traditionally, we would use things like the number of words the students produce, or the sophistication of those words, or maybe overlap of those words with a source summary. And we generally reached, and you'll see these numbers R squared, that's basically the percent of variance that's explained. We would generally maybe reach maybe 50% of a variance. So that R squared would be like a 0.5. And these large language models are really performing well, and they're fast and quick and efficient. The other thing that we do is we also want to assume that that the key words that students use in their summary are indicative of what the student has read and what the student has comprehended. And so what we do is we also use AI, generative AI in this case, to extract keywords from the source texts, and then provide feedback to users about missing key ideas that are in the summary writing, so that when users or students go back and revise their summaries, they have a pretty good understanding of like what they missed and what are some key ideas that they missed, right? We use something called Bloomberg's KeyBart. This is also freely available. It provides the highest quality key phrases. It extracts them automatically from the texts. And then we basically look at those key phrase overlap in the summary and the source text. And what these numbers indicate is that it does a pretty good job of correlating the number of keywords that are found in the summary and the quality of that summary. So we provide feedback to learners and users, not only on like their content and their wording, but also we provide summaries on like, here, these are some of the keywords, key phrases, basically ideas that you might be missing. The summary feedback looks like this. We provide feedback to the students based on those words, the content, and the topic borrowing, and something called topic similarity. Topic borrowing is basically like, how close are you to plagiarizing or not? Because we want to make sure that students aren't plagiarizing. And then topic similarity is just to make sure that students are writing on the appropriate topic. We also collect a lot of clickstream data, and this is basically any single time that a student within the intelligent textbook clicks either a space bar, a delete bar, any of the alphanumeric characters on the keyboard. We keep track of that. We keep track of it for a couple of reasons. One is that with the advent of generative AI, as Mark mentioned and others have mentioned, we really need to stop focusing so much on the product and really start focusing on the process of writing. And in this case, keystroke logging can tell us a lot about the process of writing. Keystroke logging can tell us about when students are really like writing quickly, right? They have bursts of writing when they're revising or when they're editing. But as others have mentioned, it also allows detection of cheating. And these are models that we're working on right now. And the idea is that if you have on the back end the ability to capture the keystrokes that students are writing, there is a difference between naturalistic processing when you're writing and when you're basically transcribing output produced by an LLM, so like ChatGPT. And those are functionally quite easy to distinguish using just using statistical models, right? And so in the end result, while we would like to integrate ChatGPT and we would like to integrate the ability of these generative models to kind of augment students' talents and skills, we also don't want students to just simply click and paste or to transcribe output from ChatGPT. We are also very much focused on the reading times that students use within ITEL. We do this basically by tracking the time on the screen for each subsection. And we use this to personalize user experiences. So we know that if learners fail to write passing summaries, we know what sections of the textbook they maybe weren't paying attention to. Maybe they were skimming, or maybe they just skipped over it. And in that case, what we do is we pay attention to where the students are maybe skimming or skipping. And then we use AI models, ChatGPT models, to generate short questions and answers for the students. So we pinpoint basically where the students may not be paying attention. We then use these generative AI models to develop and ask specific questions to the readers, just to keep them engaged, make the textbook more interactive, and keep students on task. We generally ask recall questions, summary questions, and inference questions, and I'll give you some stats on those and how well ChatGPT does. So this chart basically shows how well ChatGPT is at generating short answer questions and answers for subsections. And the top one basically shows that for the most part, ChatGPT always gets the correct label. Like it is very good at asking questions. It sometimes doesn't get the correct questions. Like if we ask it to write an inference question, it's not very good at writing inference questions, but it's really good at writing summary and recall questions. We want to have incorrect answers as well, because we want to have something to compare the correct answer to the incorrect answer. So when we're kind of providing feedback to our students and our participants, we understand like this is what a good answer would be and this is what a bad answer would be. And generally ChatGPT is really good at generating incorrect answers. The next one down there is something called Vicuna, and this is a correct answer. Vicuna is a ChatGPT-like large language model that's open science, freely available, produced by Facebook, I think. It is not as good as ChatGPT. So ChatGPT generally tends to win at all costs here. And what we've also found is that once we have these answers scored, we can develop basic models that are very good at classifying whether the student response is correct or incorrect. And in that sense, we can use kind of these AI generated questions and answers to make this system more interactive, right? To enhance it through AI, which is what our goals are. All right, I'm running out of time here. So we're doing a lot of development that is going to continuously include AI. We're working right now on short answers and questions for videos, because a lot of intelligent textbooks will integrate videos and video aids, and we want to be able to make those interactive as well. Basically, make sure we can ask students how well they've understood the content in those videos. We're also looking at integrating a guide on the side. So at any point, if a student has a question about the content, you know, like they're reading about Adam Smith, but they want to know, like, where was Adam Smith born? You know, they can just integrate. We'll have this guide on the side. We're going to integrate something called Ask Jill, which is an avatar that was developed at Georgia Tech that is specifically used to help students ask questions about courses. We also want to integrate concept maps from another project at Georgia State University. These concept maps are also based on AI, as is Ask Jill, and it basically tries to look at all of the concepts that are within a text, the links between those concepts, and how well students' summaries represent those links. We're also looking at enhanced visualizations to try to understand better what is happening on the back end of these large language models. Can we probe these large language models to really understand the feedback that they're giving students, whether that feedback is biased, whether it's fair, whether it can be trusted, and then trying to provide that feedback specifically to students and teachers so that students and teachers understand the decisions that are being made. And we want to make sure that we are as transparent as possible here so that students and teachers And the people that use these technologies have faith and have trust that the judgments that are being made, because a lot of these judgments are going to be important for students, like educational development, whether they're foundationally correct or incorrect. And that has to do with the development of teacher dashboards as well. We'll be doing some field testing and economics classes in Georgia Tech. If anybody would like us to do field testing with them, we would be happy to do it. And we're developing some user documentation. All of this is going to be freely available, open sourced as well. That's my lab and everybody that helps me out. They've been great. And thanks so much for your time.
Mark, you need to unmute.
Thank you very much. Scott has been doing foundational work in AI and natural language processing for quite a long time, and his center is really developing some of the most interesting materials in this area. Our next speaker is my colleague, Tamara Tate, from the Digital Learning Lab at the University of California, Irvine.
Coming from right down the hallway. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share some of our work with you related to the use of generative AI for writing and researching writing. To begin with, I'm going to share some thoughts on my goals. First, I want to provide research-based actionable information to educators so that they can teach students to become better writers. Students struggle greatly with writing, and we have unacceptable achievement gaps, from K-12 still in the colleges. So we're seeing unacceptable writing skills and unacceptable achievement gaps between minoritized students, particularly, and our more privileged students that really require addressing. But the average teacher, we find, really hasn't had a lot or sufficient training, or feels very confident or self-efficacious in teaching writing. So we really need to address that. I also want to provide that information to the writers themselves, and particularly those facing challenges in writers. Writers need to understand what works for them. So in the case study that Mark was talking about, one of the reasons we're looking at case studies is because every writer has a somewhat different process, and we really want to respect and validate them and their processes, and then share with other students and writers so that they understand what they can pick and choose from, what works for some. They can decide what from these variety of practices works for their process. And finally, I want to understand how the writing process, as we heard from Professor Worsley, the process and the product may change in light of generative AI. And this is where we're really focusing right now, and will be in the studies that I'm talking about. Can generative AI improve writing quality or maybe motivation for writing? Can it reduce achievement gaps? Do we need to prepare students or protect them, right? This is a real tension right now. And how do we always keep up equity at the forefront of this work? So if we want to use generative AI in writing, where does it fit into the writing process? Where is it best used? What purposes can it serve? And are there parts of the process maybe that should avoid using AI? I saw some of those discussions going on in the chat. Well, we're finding examples of writers using it successfully throughout the writing process, from ideation and planning to drafting and revision and editing. But we're also seeing struggles throughout the processes. Some instructors see AI as a powerful tool to overcome writer's block. Others feel students need to learn ways to deal with writer's block and get those habits of mind, have those tools at their fingertips so that they can learn to short circuit the ideation struggle without this tool. Revision seems to be less controversial. And maybe that's partly because we know students don't revise very much at all anyway. So particularly at the content level, if we can force them to rethink or revise their content as opposed to just correct their spelling errors that have little squiggly lines under them, frankly, getting students to spell check though is a plus too. But more instructors that we've talked to are comfortable inserting AI into the revision or editing process. So as we talk about where we're going in classrooms, you'll hear this as been one of the key areas we're going to start with. But there are lots of conversations ongoing, and there's a wide range of viewpoints. And just yesterday, the MLA-CCCC Joint Task Force on Writing and AI just put out its first report. And these viewpoints are really fluid, right? So what we thought yesterday may not be true today. As we're learning more, we're seeing more of how people are using the AI in the writing. And also the AI itself is changing with daily changes in models and functions and features. It's not uncommon for me to have to change a presentation I'm giving to teachers to say, oh, wait, now it does query the internet. It's not just up through 2020, or, oh, so-and-so just released a new model. So it's really a complicated, fluid time, which is exhausting for those teaching in this environment, of course. But with all those conversations, because of this rapidly developing nature, and frankly, because writing hasn't had a ton of educational research when you compare it to some of the other disciplines, we are really in desperate need of some actual data. And that's where the Digital Learning Lab has been very active in the last 6 months. And I'm going to tell you about some of our studies. They cover a range of AI uses, from holistically scoring essay quality, providing formative feedback, and ultimately understanding how the feedback impacts student revision and essay quality. So our first project is a collaboration of the Digital Learning Lab and the IES-funded National Write Center, which focuses on improving secondary student writing and history classes. This project seeks to understand the affordances and challenges of AI grading compared to human grading of essay quality based on a rubric. We're comparing 2 human raters to multiple ratings by ChatGPT, testing both internal reliability and then looking at some questions whether there are any systematic differences based on the student's English learner status or the quality of the text. We're doing this currently across history essays, ELA essays, and thank you, Scott. We're actually going to be using some of your Persuade corpus, which is publicly available. And this is all at that 6th to 12th grade level. So this is some of our K-12 work. Preliminary results suggest that AI is more consistent with itself than humans are consistent with each other. Not really surprising for those of you who have followed the research on human grading. We know it's really difficult to train human raters to consistently score essays and adhere to the rubric rather than prioritizing their own factors. Some of us really get irritated by poor spelling, and that's really hard. These were very well-trained humans who were often English language arts or history teachers or grad students in the education school. So these are really good humans, and still they're not as internally consistent. One of the things we worried about was, how are our English learners faring? We found that ChatGPT did not do as well on English learners as it did on students who were fluent in English, whether that was their first language or they were initially fluent when they came into school. But that's actually also true of humans. So AI is simply replicating human weaknesses here. Honestly, I was hoping that maybe the AI would be less biased by EL language differences, and that might be a strength it could bring to the table here. I guess that was a little optimistic given the training data AI is based on. Unfortunately, it was just as bad as the humans. ChatGPT 4 was more consistent than GPT 3.5. That suggests that we should expect improvement as the AI continues to roll out. Okay, so internal consistency is nice, but really, what about how does it do with humans? We really would love to have the teachers not have to grade quite so many papers, or provide grading earlier in the process, possibly. Can the AI come close to what we're going to call the gold standard, the human scores? But looking at the descriptive samples, their human mean was 2.89 and the AI was 3.19. That's pretty close, really. Their standard deviations, so how they're going on a scale was virtually the same. So on a population level, they looked pretty comparable. But what we really care about is an individual student with their individual essay. How comparable were they there when it mattered? Could the AI provide the same score to a particular essay as the human score? No. Exact agreement between humans was 54%, which frankly isn't that great. But between AI and human feedback was only 22%. Okay, so let's make it a little easier. What if they're within 1 point? So they don't exactly agree, but we're not saying.
Tamara, just to interrupt. So this is these papers were on a 6-point scale, right? They were graded on a 6-point scale?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So even agreement within 1 point, which is what researchers use to evaluate if they're close enough to be useful. So you know generally where along a scale the papers are, is quite different. Humans had 88% agreement within 1 point, and AI merely had 37. 88, 37. So the AI scores are almost randomly distributed, frankly. So at least without training, the current state of the models would not be particularly helpful in grading student essays, which is unfortunate. Okay, but what about feedback? We know feedback improves student writing, particularly if it can be given in a timely manner, but teachers, again, overwhelmed by time demands and student load. But we know from some of Mark's early research, feedback doesn't have to be perfect to be useful to students. In part, as I said, they do little revision. So anything that motivates them to relook at their paper and consider it from a different perspective could be productive. So we wondered if this is a place where AI could play a viable role, even if it couldn't score very accurately. So we took 200 secondary student essays, once again from the Wright Center, which had already received both scores and formative feedback by our well-trained human raters again. And we ran those through ChatGPT 3.5 using parallel instructions to those given to the humans. We then coded that feedback by our super team here and looked at these 5 characteristics of good quality feedback that research has suggested are important. So was the feedback criteria based? Did they reference or allude to the rubric components? Was it clear, specific, actionable, clearly described? Was it accurate? We don't really think we want to tell a student that they need a thesis when they had a thesis statement. Is it developmentally appropriate? Is this the next best thing to work on? We don't want to tell the student to work on language choice when they only wrote 2 sentences, right? We want to encourage them to write more first. And finally, is it supportive in tone? So you can see here, the humans are in blue, and they're generally better than the AI, which is in gold, at all the characteristics, except providing feedback that was criteria-based. These are all statistically significant differences, but as a practical matter, the AI wasn't that far off. And here's a quick look at the box plots for the humans on the left and the AI on the right. I'm a little worried about the middle in green, which is accuracy, because the AI has a lot of downward range. So this was on a scale of 1 to 5. And we see, while the median was 4 in the AI, the median was much higher for the humans. And accuracy seems like something we would really care about, obviously. So what's our takeaway? Well, there may be a role for AI-generated feedback in the writing classroom, perhaps in addition to instructor and peer feedback. So if we think that that's true, how can we see what students are actually doing with that perhaps imperfect but possibly useful feedback? How do they use it? Does it motivate them more? And for that, we really needed to go into classes with students and instructors. So we're partnering with Ben Motz and his team at Indiana University to study freshman composition classes. We chose to study peer feedback because after discussing it with the leads of the freshman composition tracks, peer feedback was a common thing that they did in all of the courses, in all of their permutations. And there's a strong research base for peer feedback. And the freshmen that they were teaching really were struggling initially at providing good quality substantive feedback. So there was a hope that maybe the AI could help teach them to do the peer feedback better too. Finally, the instructors felt that we're more comfortable using ChatGPT outside of the origination or ideation phase, where they worried it might negatively impact students' own ability to come with original ideas. So they found that this was the most pedagogically sound way to start studying it in their classes. So we're going to have 3 conditions. 1, business as usual, where the classmates give and receive peer feedback on their draft. 1 where ChatGPT will provide all the feedback. And 1 where the peer reviewer will run it through their peer's essay through ChatGPT to get its suggestions, but the student will choose what to take and what not to take. So it will be mediated and augmented by the ChatGPT feedback, but ultimately the student peer will be responsible for it. So we'll look at things like the student's final grade on their text, their reflective feedback on the process as the recipient of feedback and the provider of feedback, and diving a little deeper into the revision we see in each case. The last project I'll share really quickly is a partnership with the UCI Engineering School to integrate generative AI into a mandatory upper division course for all engineering majors, focusing on technical communication and writing. Engineers of the wild do a ton of writing, but students coming into that major are often not that comfortable. They prefer the math and science domains. So we're looking at appropriate ways to integrate it throughout the class. This isn't going to be a one and done intervention. Rather, we'll ultimately have several different types of sample assignments, materials, and academics across all major areas of the course, as well as through our AI instructional framework, the one that Mark discussed earlier. We hope that weaving it through this content will give engineers more ability to use it and transfer their knowledge of AI once they graduate. So the curriculum has learning goals like understanding the AI strengths and weaknesses. And we're going to make sure they actually experience some of those weaknesses. We want them to feel it, hallucinate. And then we're going to support this curriculum with a platform that we're building that will ensure they have access to ChatGPT and scaffold their use of it. Instructors will be able to determine on a class by class or assignment by assignment basis the functionality of the tool. So they can turn on and off different features. We will provide prompt scaffolding, which the students will be able to see. And if teachers permit, even allow open access to ChatGPT. It's a temporary bridge to support students through this class as they learn about AI, not to be used forever, but just as they're learning it. And the tool will also provide us some background information, much like Scott will be knowing what they put in and get out of the ChatGPT. Of course, we'll provide professional development materials so that we can then expand beyond one course and explain to future teachers what they need to implement specific assignments, what it requires to be successful, and allow them to then roll it out into their own class context. So what's left to explore? A lot, K-12, especially high school, a lot of resources, the case studies that Mark created, talked about earlier. But it's taking a large team. We're having a lot of fun. I have a privilege of working with just really brilliant folks, and I appreciate that. And I will wrap it up a couple minutes late. Apologize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Our next speaker is Sarah Levine, an assistant professor of education at Stanford University. Sarah? Are you on mute, Sarah?
Hi, everyone. Good to see faces and drawings and names. I'm really glad to kind of follow up right here because the research that I'm going to share is in the K-12 space. And I've been taking furious notes because everything that everybody else is doing is directly applicable to everything that we're doing. So my colleagues here, I'll just share my screen. More slides. My colleagues, Sarah Beck from NYU and Chris Ma and Jalen Pittman from Stanford, have been working for a while on classroom-based research. And today I'll be sharing some of that data and just some kind of initial analyses from that project. As everybody's saying, AI is here, and now we're exploring the degree to which AI tools like ChatGPT can enhance or inhibit students' motivation, their skills, their content knowledge, their awareness of voice and style, all of that stuff at the high school level right now. And what we've done, you see, I managed not to find a title, but instead did let ChatGPT do it for me. And this is one of the things that we're discovering is interesting and useful with ChatGPT. And that is it kind of acts as an example machine for students. And one of the things we're most interested in is the degree to which seeing a whole bunch of examples, a whole bunch of alternatives and options might actually help students kind of develop their schema for writing style, writing structure. Big questions that we're looking at with our current research are drawing from cognitive strategies research on the writing project process, and on theories and models of writing as a sociocultural process. And so we're asking all sorts of questions regarding everything from what happens when students revise, what happens when there's no first draft and students are selecting what to do as a second draft, what happens when students aren't generating themselves, but kind of only editing. How do students become more aware of their own voice and style when they're using ChatGPT, and on and on. The research that we're doing that I'm going to share today is taking place in a local high school where all the students are going to be first-gen college students, and they're a pretty motivated bunch. We got 12 student volunteers, and we paid them stipends for participating, to meet with us after school in a bunch of sessions to kind of practice different kinds of writing, from argument to storytelling, and also to explore things like the ethics of ChatGPT, as many of you are doing. We gathered data from screencasts to transcripts to interviews. So, for example, one of the prompts that students engaged in was imagining that their school was going to introduce a new mascot. And what should it be? Just a basic argument prompt. Should it be redwoods, seals, warriors, or something else that you choose? We gathered, as students were working, sometimes in pairs and sometimes alone, screencasts of what students were doing with ChatGPT and as they composed on a Google Doc. Just taking a minute to let you be able to look at this stuff. We gathered transcripts of dialogue between ChatGPT and student. Lots of challenges to ChatGPT in these transcripts, like, how do I drink water? Or where is the nearest 7-Eleven? And we gathered student drafts. And we did some interviews. So here's just some kind of initial data, what happened. One of the things we were really curious about was, what did students ask ChatGPT to do? What do they want from ChatGPT? Basic categories we developed after looking at about 90 prompts from our 12 students over different writing activities. Content, requests for editing, requests for outlines, requests that have to do with style and rhetorical power, and requests that ChatGPT behave like a thesaurus or a dictionary. We kind of tallied up the different requests, and one of the things that we found was that ChatGPT is mostly providing ideas to students, at least, for example, with this mascot activity. Much of what students were asking for were things like, what do warriors symbolize? Why would seals be a bad mascot? Lots and lots of ideas from ChatGPT. Very few requests for ChatGPT to generate an entire paragraph. To very few requests, surprisingly, for ChatGPT to edit student work. And few requests in the rhetorical arena. But we think that arena is so interesting that we want to kind of go back and do a little bit of pushing to see what else we can find out. So first off, content, not copying. And this was a real relief to our partner teacher, who is very concerned about even embarking on this research with us. We also kind of did a little dive on 2 students who were interested in using a husky for their student mascot. Here's some of the dialogue between students and ChatGPT. What a husky symbolize. Husky symbolize strength, stamina, loyalty, intelligence, independence, and connection to nature. And here's a kind of a combination of Enna and Cece's talk with one another their chat with GPT and their writing. And so I know you can see it, but I'll read it just in case. Anna says, okay, I'm just thinking we could go with an animal at Sunrise School. Cece says, yeah, Rocky, he's been here the longest. Anna says, oh, we can also ask it, ChatGPT, what can husky symbolize? So they ask. ChatGPT responds. Cece reads silently, and then she summarizes. It says like basically hard work. And this is something that was interesting to us. So they weren't just kind of lifting, they were actually reading and comprehending and kind of collapsing or condensing. And then Anna says, because huskies are hardworking. Well, Rocky is not hardworking, but it's okay, we'll go with it. Also interesting, now they're going to use some of these principles, some of these symbols, even though they are not necessarily connected to their personal experience. Anna says, okay, huskies symbolize strength, stamina, loyalty, intelligence, independence. Boom. She likes it. She's lifting it. Then Cece says, I don't think any of the nature stuff is important. This is interesting to us too. Now we're watching students decide what's salient. And I think oftentimes in composition, students don't have an opportunity to accept some stuff and reject some stuff because they are the ones who are generating and they don't know about alternatives. Here, students are acting as pretty smart editors, and they're beginning to also develop their own understanding of what it is they want to say. Just a little more. Anna says, so we need the opening. I think the opening could be something about Rocky, like you see her eating and there's always a friendly face and a face waiting for treats and tail wagging. And Cece says, okay, we can ask ChatGPT what would be a good starting line. And Anna says, I don't know. I feel like we could figure that part out ourselves because like ChatGPT won't know about Rocky. This is interesting to us too. They have a sense of what ChatGPT is, that it's a computer and that it doesn't know anything about their own personal experiences. So then it's not equipped to give them what they want. So that they wrote themselves. For many of us, the longest standing dog on campus is Susan's husky Rocky, Sunrise prides itself, and so forth. And now you see they've lifted some of that language from ChatGPT. So this is kind of some of the stuff that we're looking at and we're really curious about. It's all about what are students seeing as relevant, what are they taking up, what are they rejecting, and why, and how might that process be developing their own schemata as readers and writers. Here's just a little bit more. So students' drafts before and after ChatGPT, what did they take up? In some cases, they took up everything. So they gave ChatGPT a draft and they asked ChatGPT to edit. Here's what ChatGPT did. And here's what the students took up, just everything. Same thing with final sentence. ChatGPT got a little bit more specific, and the students took it up. Sometimes they rejected everything. Here's an example of a paragraph from the original essay. ChatGPT's kind of dumbing down of or making generic the student's original voice and writing. And when we asked students about their choices here, the students said, we added little jokes in between the writing, not part of the writing, but in between, to lighten it up and make it like maybe more convincing. And then when we asked ChatGPT to edit it, it took all the jokes out. It made it more like not close to home, more like distant and robotic. It's basically like Google and Grammarly put together. In our research across these 12 students, most of them agreed that ChatGPT was basically like Google and Grammarly. They were not, as we thought they would be, blown away by everything that ChatGPT could do. Instead, they really almost to a one, when asked, responded with some version of eh. So it might be that they just don't yet know because they haven't experimented enough with all of the things that ChatGPT can do for them. It might be that the kinds of assignments we're giving them are formulaic enough already that they don't need ChatGPT to do that much work. But we're especially interested in the possibilities that students might begin to develop an understanding of their own voice and their own style and the value of their voice and style by comparing it with a more kind of generic version. It's kind of like turning poetry into prose, and that in that way understanding what poetry does. So some of the conclusions that we're coming to, and I would really, really love to hear what you all think about this, are that when it comes to cognitive strategies for writing, ChatGPT is basically kind of a contrasting cases provider for students who don't yet have the kind of schemata that experienced writers apply when they're engaging in all those iterative aspects of the writing project. So instead of students having to generate from essentially nothing, or from a very vague understanding of what a school teacher wants them to write, instead of what's the one right way, it's here's one way, but you could go another. There are options. Experienced writers know that, and they have them in their head. Emerging writers, not so much. We also see ChatGPT as valuable in terms of comparing options for the kind of argument, for the reasons for argument, for word choice, for style, and for students to become much more clear in what it is they're trying to say by rejecting some of the stuff that ChatGPT has to offer. We're also seeing that ChatGPT may do as much to support students' reading skills. This goes to some of our questions about reading, as it does for their writing, because they're doing so much more reading during these exercises than they would normally do. Normally, in their writing about mascots, they'd just be pulling from their own set of examples. Now they're having to read all of the back and forth between ChatGPT and themselves and kind of condense, summarize, and cut. So we're excited about all of this stuff. We're also excited that maybe students aren't so excited about ChatGPT. Maybe they're not going to be as compelled to cheat as some teachers are concerned about, and with good reason. I totally get it. Maybe they're not going to be as compelled to cheat as students or as teachers are fearing. And so this is just the beginning for us. We're just still kind of swirling around in all this data, and I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this stuff. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really rich to get some K-12 examples. This is brilliant work. Okay, next we'll hear from AJ Alvero, a computational social scientist at the University of Florida, Department of Sociology, Criminology, and Law. AJ.
Hello, can you all hear me and see the screen? All righty, amazing. So I am kind of pivoting here a little bit. I'm going to be talking about comparisons of human written text versus synthetic or AI generated text in the context of college admissions. So the name of the title, ChatGPT is People. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the 1973 science fiction movie, Soylent Green, but the twist at the end of that movie is that this food product that people had to consume was actually coming from people. This is a famous line at the end of the movie. So just as a disclaimer, the rest of the talk is going to be far less gruesome than the imagery of Soylent Green. So, right? But, kind of like in Soylent Green and science fiction, large language models are similarly generated by us in the text that we post to the internet. So in this analogous sense, large language models are also people. What this also means, in terms of social science, is that we can use what we already know about about connections between people, language, and writing to both better understand large language models and vice versa. So just as a little bit of research context. So again, like I mentioned, I'm looking at college admissions essays, but I wanted to start kind of bigger and broader than that. So, in general, education research has taken a strong lead in understanding the way that social identities, contexts, and backgrounds inform the way that people speak and communicate. This is very similar to like sociolinguistics as a field. So in my past research, I took this idea, the way, our identities and the connections to the way we communicate, in this case, the way that we write. And I used that as a framework to analyze textual data using computational tools. And specifically, I did work on college admissions essays submitted to the University of California system. And what I wanted to find there was like, in the ways that we model these relationships with spoken language, what is the strength of the relationships between student background and identity with the text that they produce in this particular context of college admissions? And the answer is it's very predictive. It's very, very strong patterning with respect to student background and the text that they produce. So just as an example, using machine learning and generating numerical representations of college admissions essays, you can predict an applicant's SAT score within about 120 points. And just as a reference, the standard deviation for the SAT is about 217 points. So, other studies have, found similar strong patterning with respect to gender, ethnic subgroups, first-gen status, income, other identity markers as well. And, even though this is not necessarily about classroom teaching and learning, I hope that, people can kind of see these connections to their own interest in research. But of course, there were two huge challenges to the work that I've been doing, which is the recent Supreme Court ruling and ChatGPT. So these, this first exogenous shock was the Supreme Court's decision to ban affirmative action, and the decision generated a lot of conversation and attention on the essays in particular. So much so that Harvard even sent an email acknowledging the decision, but also noting how they could kind of continue to use the essays in this particular way to consider race. And this is just a snapshot of it. So Harvard claims they may consider admissions decisions where an applicant's discussion of race, how race affected their life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. Presumably that information is going to be communicated through the essays. But of course, are there going to be new lawsuits? Is there going to be even less transparency? So I think in higher education, there is this idea that maybe we're just going to get rid of the essays in light of the Supreme Court decision. And of course, there's ChatGPT. And not only is there the Harvard case, but maybe personal statements and essays are redundant now that we can basically press play on a machine and generate thousands of them, which I actually did for this talk. But I think there's fundamental questions, regardless of who generated, there's still questions about their utility and their usage. If essays can sound like essays written by a student who can afford a $300 an hour consultant. And I'm actually referring to this news article where the author, who is a college admissions counselor, charges about $300 an hour. And if you read this article, they talk about how ChatGPT can generate an essay that they would recommend a student submit to an elite college. Sorry, that's kind of like a mouthful. But of course, there's very little. There's still so much to learn about large language models and the text that they generate, with huge implications, right? In the context of college admissions, these essays are still used for scholarships, and there's questions of authenticity to consider. So for example, if students are using ChatGPT to generate their essays, how do we allot scholarships, for first-gen minority students, or how do we select students for bridge programs? A lot of that work is typically done with the essays. Big exogenous shocks, right? Oops, oh my God. So despite everything, there's still a lot of basic questions we need to answer. There's still a need to communicate accurate, authentic information. And on top of the very basic questions, we should answer or at least better understand with respect to large language models and AI. And this is where I'm kind of coming in. So on a few projects, I'm looking at this relationship between large language models, personal statements, and college admissions in the following way. So in one project, we start with the question of which applicants are or are not using large language models to generate essays in selective college admissions. So here we use AI detection tools to label essays. Is this written by an AI or is it not? And then we track demographic patterns based on income, first-gen status, and eventual college acceptance. This is super preliminary early work with a team of researchers at an elite private university in the Northeast. And that's one project. The other project that we're working on is kind of considering, with that sociolinguistic frame, like if ChatGPT is generating text, who does that text, quote unquote, sound like? So to do this, we use the same computational tools from my previous research to analyze a data set of synthetic college admissions essays. So I'm going to present results from data that was generated for the project on the left-hand side. But this is all ongoing work, very preliminary, so things might change. So actually, this first project of like detecting, who is using AI, who's using large language models, maybe it models patterns that look a lot like the digital divide. Here's how I thought it was going to go, right? So we have, our applicants, and our applicants have these certain characteristics, and these characteristics kind of influence the way that they write their essays, but also whether or not they're using ChatGPT. And then we could see, we could answer basic questions like, well, students with characteristic X were N% more or less likely to use AI to generate their personal statements, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe some of you might have guessed in the questions and comments, but the latest and greatest of AI detection methods were basically like 0% accurate, like much lower than even random guessing between human and non-human written essays. So alas, there's not much to talk about here. Maybe these tools are going to improve, but it's probably not going to be for a while. And it's also possible that these accuracies could improve with additional manipulation or, massaging of the prompts, etc. But but basically what I want to communicate to this audience is that, at least from my own research and my work on this, AI detection tools are not ready out of the box, despite broad claims to their efficacy. So that was, my sad result for study one. But so just to give you a sense of what that means, so these are all so in the with the team I'm working with, applicants to the private university in the Northeast have to write 3 essays. One is basically like, well, why our school, why our program? And this is an example of a ChatGPT generated essay. I can leave it up for a second. They talk about, they name the university, they want to major in computer science, world-class facilities, the faculty, great. For another prompt, which is basically asking them, what is a problem that you had to solve in your neighborhood or community? And the AI generated a story of cooling systems at the grocery store. They even use, I don't know if this is a real thing, but towards the bottom they mention Danifeis curves. I'm not sure if that's a mathematical term, but it sounds very fancy. And then finally, the third essay prompt was free form. You pick a topic. As a young scholar, they talked about COVID-19. They use even like punctuation. So again, these regardless of whether or not you think you could identify these as a human versus AI generated admissions essay, the latest and greatest of AI detection could not. So, like I said, still things to talk about, especially with regard to writing style and content decisions of AI, right? We still need to know what kind of text they tend to generate. And I argue it's valuable to know if the text they generate is similar or to the way that certain students from certain backgrounds write. I would also argue that right now we're inside a small window where such an analysis is possible, because there's still so much pre-large language model generated text. And in the future, maybe in the near future, that's not going to be quite the case. So I'd encourage more of these kinds of studies. So basically what I did in this last set of analyses is I compared essay style features between a racially representative random sample of UC applicant essays. And that's from a paper that I wrote, or I co-wrote in 2021. I also compare essay style features with a data set of all Latinx identifying first-year applicants from another paper. There's a preprint available. And then I compare these essay features with a data set of essays generated using a large language model from the same essay prompts. So the data, the data I used from my past two studies, publicly available. You can replicate this experiment or compare with your own data quite easily. So as I alluded to, these results are highly preliminary. They're probably going to change, but if I had to look at my crystal ball, I would guess the values of the patterns could change, but the tightness of the distributions of these patterns will not change. And I know that's kind of vague and esoteric, but it will make sense in a second. So the computational tool I used was Luke, specifically the 2015 version. So this Luke stands for Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count. This is the 2015 version was used in a study of admissions essays submitted to the University of Texas at Austin. And I also used it in my past work analyzing a racially representative random sample of UC applicants. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the two most positively correlated Luke features with essays with respect to income, and the two most negatively correlated Luke features with respect to income from my past work, meaning analytic language and comma usage, literally just the number of commas that appear in an applicant's essay, were the most positively correlated, meaning higher income students used more of this type of language. Whereas the dictionary word, which is the number of words that appear in Luke's internal dictionaries and literally just verb usage, those were associated with students from lower income backgrounds. And there's going to be additional analyses in the full studies. So just to kind of walk you through this figure, so the blue line is, again, is a data set of about 28,000 synthetic essays, ran it through Luke, the 2015 version, and then I compared these features again with these past analyses that I was a part of. So this is in the top left. This is splitting up the past data by income decile. So what this means is that for the red and the green lines, these were the comma values for the highest income decile students. And what you can see here is that the means, which is represented by the peaks, are very similar to the mean of the ChatGPT essays. So what this means, just plainly, is that ChatGPT essays, the way they use commas or the frequency they use commas is fairly similar to the way that the highest income UC applicants were using commas. For the bottom income decile, you see that's not quite the case. You see the peaks for the green and the red is slightly to the left. It's not as similar as the synthetic essays. And then here we have the middle and this is the all income, meaning just literally throw everyone into the analysis. The other thing I wanted to point out here is the tightness of the distribution. So for the green and the red lines, the spread is wider, whereas for the synthetic essays, the spread is much tighter, meaning that the variation that we see in kind of like natural human writing is not easily mimicked by large language models. This is another feature, and with this one, it's more stark. So this was with the analytic language that Luke calculates. Analytic language is defined in the package as words that are associated with formal, logical, and hierarchical thinking patterns. I also just want to note, I'm not using these as this very strong endorsement of Luke, but rather because it's a tool that is used across a lot of domains and has been used in the exact domain of college admissions essays. So we see here, again, much wider spread for the student-written essays as opposed to the synthetic essays represented by the blue curve.
AJ, we'll need you to wrap up pretty soon.
Yes, yeah. So I'm nearly done. Thank you. This is the same patterns for the dictionary features, same patterns for the verb usage. And just to wrap up, less variation in the generated essays. So basically, the key result that I want to communicate here is that these results point to a combination of, the AI essays are written. Yes, they're written more like those from higher income backgrounds, but also that they're fairly limited in the text that they create, and they can't easily model natural variation in text. So I messed with the randomness feature that you can use, and it was very sensitive. Even increasing it by 0.01 would generate a lot of like nonsense text. And even though the AI detectors are about 0% accurate, maybe students and teachers believe that they're accurate, and they're going to act on that belief rather than some kind of reported accuracy. Okay, and I'm done. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for those brilliant set of talks. One thing that comes to mind, and I would encourage writing researchers to think about this. We especially within this window, we don't have to know if an individual text was written by AI or not to do interesting comparative research. So one of my actually former doctoral students, he's now an assistant professor at Teachers College of Columbia, is comparing all discussion posts written at a university before November 30th, 2022, and after November 30th, 2022. And he's using some of these same tools like Luke to see, do they vary? Is student writing different now than it was before? And the most interesting part that he's looking at, and how does that vary by socioeconomic status? Do wealthier students writing, has it changed more than low-income students? Or do international students writing change more than domestic students? And certainly we could do the same thing with admissions essays. We could compare admissions essays written last year to admissions essays before ChatGPT to ones written afterwards by demographic group, and see which demographic groups admissions essays have changed the most. So I hope to see that research in the future. We have a few minutes more for questions, and I think this is the $1 million question that lots of people are asking about. Alan Bacher asked about this in the chat, and Christina Dimicelli also asked similar things. Has to do with plagiarism. So as Alan asked, is there a fundamental question of relevance in today's world as to the issue of plagiarism? Is this only an issue in the academic world? In the real world, does it matter if the object of exercise is to research and deliver answers? And, in the earlier chat, there was a question that wasn't answered, which is, how are we concerned about Keiling's work and whether it represents academic dishonesty or not? I'm thinking back, let's say this Korean scientist I pointed to before is doing research on cancer and comes up with a breakthrough a medical finding on cancer. Does it make a difference if she writes it in Korean and then translates it automatically into English? Or does it matter if she sketches out in very bad English some of the findings and the things that she needs to focus on, and ask ChatGPT to put this in a polished essay? So how do we think about play, and this is on a sliding scale in a sense. We have Microsoft Word has all these tools for grammar check and spell check, but now we have things like Grammarly that increasingly do a lot of rewriting. We have things like Quillbot, which can do rewriting, and we can have ChatGPT, which can more completely rewrite something. So how do we think about plagiarism both in and outside of the classroom? I'm going to throw that open to anybody in the panel and see what they want to say.
Sarah, I think your comment that you just put in the chat is really true, right? There are different types of plagiarism, ideas versus language, and it's very genre and audience dependent. So I actually, many moons ago, was a lawyer and wrote a lot of memos to clients telling them what to do. If I copied sentences, no one cared. If I'm the person writing it for an academic journal, then that has different expectations. So is that part of what you're thinking, Sarah?
Yes, and I'm thinking now specifically of for example, English language arts context in a high school, where a kid might be doing some writing on a piece of literature, and the kind of the implied demand of assignments like those is often to find something original to say about a text that has been talked about and written about forever. And that's very hard to do. So even if you didn't, so I think in that case, teachers end up being more concerned because you can't necessarily say something too original about The Great Gatsby, but teachers are concerned that when language gets lifted, because they're using that as a kind of a proxy for original thinking, I think. And I'm not sure I don't know how to think about it.
I think partly it means we have to be thinking about our questions better, and be explicit what we're looking for, right? Are we using writing, as we often do, as a proxy for something else? Maybe we need to go directly to that something else. We see that a lot of different content areas are using writing where maybe that's not the right tool to use or the right mode to use.
And I'll just add one more quick thing. Yes, this ChatGPT and AI are going to make us rethink how we teach and why we teach and what we teach. But at the K-12 level, as long as the standardized tests that show up at the end of the year have not rethought any of those things, teachers are in a real bind about kind of the formulaic nature of what they're teaching and the way that AI can take up that formula.
And this relates to the other question in the chat from Tim Brodsky. How do we inspire and invest students in their own learning so they don't want to use AI as a shortcut? But I mean, is that the right question? And when is it appropriate to use AI as a shortcut? But how do we, whatever we see the learning outcomes, how do we inspire students in the appropriate ways?
And I'm sorry to be talking so much, I guess, but something that Sarah Beck and I have been talking about a lot is, and I'm sure everybody here, is if you substituted a human for whatever it is that you're asking ChatGPT to do, how does that change? Brainstorming help with a human? Great. Brainstorming help with ChatGPT? Are we stealing ideas? Brainstorming help with language? Brainstorming help with structure? Writing is social. Does ChatGPT count enough as a social being that we shouldn't be worried about all this? And so on.
Any final comment from anybody on the panel? Okay, well, thank you all for an inspiring morning. At least it's morning here in Southern California. I realize it's other times elsewhere. In the afternoon, we're going to have two really exciting, after a half-hour break, we're going to have two very exciting panels, one on personalized teaching and learning, and one on pedagogical lightning talks. And that last one I think will be really interesting because they're really short video presentations with the speakers available to answer questions that are looking at really practical ideas about what people are doing in the classroom in both K-12 and higher education.